The door in the desert had no right to exist. Cole Mercer had been riding 11 days through the Devil's Flats when he found it a perfect rectangle of alien metal, flush with the cracked Nevada earth, cool to the touch under a sun that turned iron into brands and men into ghosts. He had been tracking Silas Dune for $300. He had found something worth considerably more than that. He pressed the single depression near the seam. The hatch rose without a sound, and cold air, impossibly cold, impossibly clean, breathed up from the darkness below, like a world exhaling a secret it had kept for 40 years. He climbed down, and at the bottom of that ladder, in a chamber of blue-white light beneath the skin of the American West, 4 women were waiting. They were not human. They were the most beautiful things Cole Mercer had ever seen. The room below was circular, perhaps 60 feet across, its walls alive with pulsing panels of soft light. Its center dominated by a table that wasn't quite a table, an active surface covered in shifting, luminous diagrams that reorganized themselves in slow, deliberate cycles, like a map of something larger than any territory Cole had ever ridden across. Instruments lined every wall, strange and precise, and utterly foreign to his eye, arranged with the methodical care of people who understood exactly what they were doing. The 4 of them worked without urgency, without fear, and when Cole stepped through the archway with his hand on his Colt and dust still on his boots from 11 days in the Nevada sun, only one of them turned to face him as though she had known, long before the hatch opened, that someone was coming. She was tall. Her hair fell dark and loose past her shoulders, moving in slow waves as though responding to currents of air Cole couldn't feel. Her eyes were the vivid botanical green of new leaves held up to sunlight, wide and direct and entirely untroubled by his presence. Across her cheekbones and down the line of her jaw, fine scales caught the room's blue-white glow and threw it back in copper and gold, each one hexagonal and precise, each one shading into the next with the accuracy of something grown rather than made, fading toward her lips and the bridge of her nose, where her skin became smooth and warm-toned and thoroughly, strikingly beautiful. She wore a close-fitting charcoal garment, sleeveless, and the scales continued down her neck, over her collarbones, spreading across her forearms in overlapping tiers that shifted between gold and deep bronze depending on the angle. She was not human. Cole's eyes told him that plainly, calmly, and without the option of revision. She was also, without any qualification or asterisk, the most remarkable-looking person he had ever stood in a room with. She spoke first. The sound was layered 2 tones at once. A spoken pitch riding over a lower sustained note produced simultaneously somewhere in her chest or throat, and the combination moved through the air with a quality that was less like hearing and more like contact. It was not English. It was not any language Cole's ears had ever received. "I reckon," he said carefully into the silence that followed, "that you speak English about as well as I speak whatever that was." She looked at him for a moment. Then in English, clear and precise and slightly formal in the way of someone who has learned a language from careful listening rather than living inside it, she said, "We understand English. We have been listening to it for some time." Cole took his hand off his Colt. Slow, visible. He made sure she saw. "That's mighty reassuring," he said. "All things considered." A sound came from the far side of the room, warm, double-toned, entirely recognizable as laughter. Cole turned. The auburn-haired one was watching him with open amusement, her forest-green scales shifting along her forearms as she set down whatever instrument she'd been holding. Her name, he would learn, was Soren, and she laughed the way some people do when they've been waiting a long time for something interesting to happen. The copper-gold woman Solara, as she would introduce herself, walked toward him without haste. "You were tracking someone," she said. It was not a question. "That's my line of work," Cole said. "The man you are tracking is here." She paused. "He arrived 2 days ago. He found the entrance as you found it." Another pause. Briefer. He was not as measured in his response. Cole looked at her steadily. "Is he alive?" "Yes." "Is he in a condition that allows transport?" Solara's copper-gold jaw caught the light as she considered the question with what appeared to be genuine care for precision. "He is in a condition," she said, "that prevents him from causing harm. I understand this may not be the same answer." Cole almost smiled. In 11 years of bounty work from the Rio Grande to the Oregon Territory, the number of people who had given him that quality of nuanced response to a direct question could be counted on one hand. "Ma'am," he said, "I don't believe I've introduced myself. Cole Mercer, out of Nevada Territory." "I know," Solara said. He studied her face, the copper scales at her jaw, the deep green eyes that held him with the calm confidence of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by the universe and had settled into a posture of engaged observation. "And you are?" "The sound of my name in our language would not be comfortable for human hearing," she said. "The nearest correspondence in yours is Selara." "Selara," Cole repeated. He looked past her at the others. The silver-haired woman Vael had turned from the central table, and her eyes, fully open now, were a uniform pure gold without pupil or white, like two steady flames, watching Cole with frank and unself-conscious scientific curiosity. The dark-haired one, Drenith, stood at her wall station with the alert stillness of someone who has suspended work but not attention, her teal scales deep as ocean water along her cheekbones, bronze at her jaw, her amber eyes taking Cole apart with the efficiency of someone accustomed to assessment. And Soren, the auburn-haired one who had laughed, was now moving closer with the easy gait of a person in no hurry but heading somewhere specific, her near black forest green scales making her forearms look like something from the natural world, given purpose and direction. "How long?" Cole asked. "Have you been down here?" Selara moved to the central table and gestured for him to approach. He did slowly, watching all four of them in his peripheral vision, the way he always did in rooms with multiple unknown variables. Up close, the scales on Selara's jaw and cheekbones were extraordinary in their detail. Each one perhaps a quarter-inch across, hexagonal and slightly beveled at the edges, the bevel catching the room's light in a continuous fractional flicker that gave her face an effect of constant, quiet luminosity. The skin between the scales was smooth and warm-toned, and her eyes at close range had a depth that was not quite like looking into human eyes, less like a window into familiar interior life, more like looking into a system that was fully coherent and entirely differently organized. "By your calendar," she said, studying the shifting surface of the table, 43 years. Cole stood with that for a moment. 43 years beneath the Nevada desert. He thought about all the men who had crossed these flats in that time, prospectors, surveyors, drifters, outlaws, soldiers, and not one of them had known. The land had held the secret without effort, the way the desert holds everything, indifferently, completely, for as long as required. "You arrived damaged," he said. It wasn't a question. Selara glanced at him with something that might have been mild surprise. "Yes. And you've been repairing? For most of that time?" "Yes." She returned her gaze to the table. "The primary repairs were completed 11 months ago. So what are you waiting for?" The room was quiet for a beat. Vale's gold eyes moved slowly across Cole's face. Drenith had returned to her instruments, but her posture communicated continued attention. Soren was perhaps 12 feet away now, and she was watching him with that expression of open, genuine interest that he was beginning to recognize as simply how she looked at things she found worth looking at. "There are others of our kind," Selara said carefully, "who do not share our disposition toward the people of this world. When we depart, we do not wish to leave behind consequences. We have been observing, assessing." Cole looked at her. He was a man who had spent 11 years reading people, their motivations, their loyalties, the gap between what they said and what they intended, and he had developed that reading into something close to a second instinct. He looked for the gap now, in Selara's face and voice, and the precise architecture of her words, and he could not find one. "The man I was tracking," he said. "Silas Dune. You said he wasn't measured in his response." "He was frightened," Selara said. "Frightened men with weapons become dangerous before they become reasonable. We were required to neutralize his capacity for action." "He's unharmed?" "He is unharmed. He is resting." A brief pause. "Involuntarily. I need to bring him back to Carson City. There's a judge with a warrant and $300 posted on him." Selara met his eyes. "You may take him," she said. "We have no interest in keeping him. He is—" The pause before her next word was brief and eloquent. "Unpleasant." Soren made a sound that was unmistakably agreement. Cole turned to look at her, and she met his gaze directly, her dark eyes bright with some private assessment of the situation. Her auburn hair caught the room's blue light and threw back something warmer, something that belonged to a different world than this one. The green-black scales across her forearms shifted as she crossed her arms loosely, comfortable and unhurried, and for a moment Cole had the strange and entirely uncharacteristic thought that he was glad Cinder had stopped. Soren led him through the corridor to where Silas Dune sat in his involuntary rest, and as they walked she talked, and her English was more fluent than Selara's, less formal. with a quality of enjoyment in the language itself, like a person who has recently discovered a particularly interesting game. "You are not afraid of us," she said. "Not quite a question." "I'm cautious," Cole said. "That's different." She glanced back at him with a look that contained both amusement and something more considered. "Caution is a form of respect," she said. "In my experience, it also extends your life considerably." She laughed, that double-toned warmth that filled the corridor and bounced off the luminous walls. "You are an interesting man, Cole Mercer." "I've been called worse," he said. Up close, her face was detailed and remarkable. The scales at her temples were nearly black at their centers, lightening to a deep forest green at their edges, and they spread in a precise fan from her hairline to the line of her jaw, fading to smooth at her cheekbones and leaving her nose and mouth and the center of her face clear, a face that was open and warm and direct in its expressions, in a way Cole had not expected and found, if he was being honest with himself, entirely disarming. Her dark eyes held a quality he associated with genuinely curious minds, not passive reception, but active engagement, taking things apart to see what they were made of, reassembling them with interest. "How many of your people are there?" Cole asked. "Elsewhere." "Many," Soren said. Her voice was even. "Not all of them concerned with what happens to the worlds they pass through. But you are." She looked at him. "We are 4 who are," she said. "Sometimes 4 is sufficient." Silas Dune sat in a small room off the main corridor, not a cell, no bars, no lock, but seated in the center of the space with his eyes open and staring at nothing, breathing slow and regular, in every outward appearance awake, but clearly absent from himself. He was thick-set, dark-bearded, around 40, and even in this emptied condition, Cole could read in the set of his jaw and the particular quality of his stillness, the character profile that tended to generate warrants, the specific kind of man who moved through the world, treating other people's lives as obstacles to his own convenience. "What did you do to him?" Cole asked. "We quieted the part of him that was reactive," Soren said. "The rest is simply waiting to resume. He will be entirely himself within 2 hours of waking." She paused. "Which may not, I understand, be a recommendation." Cole took cord from his coat pocket and bound Dune's wrists with the efficiency of 11 years of practice. Dune offered nothing, no resistance, no flinch, no awareness. It was the most cooperative a prisoner had ever been during this particular process, and Cole found it both useful and profoundly strange. Soren watched with focused interest. "You are very competent at this," she said straightforwardly, the way someone might note the quality of a well-maintained tool. 11 years of practice," Cole said. He stood and looked at her. "Why do you do it? Stay and watch and assess? You said your repairs were done 11 months ago. You could have gone." She was quiet for a moment, not the pause of someone forming an evasion, but of someone giving the question genuine consideration. "Because we have been here 43 years, she said finally, "and in that time we have listened. We have watched what comes and goes across that desert above us. We have heard your wars and your music and your cruelties, and the things your people do when they think no one is observing them." She met his eyes. "When you leave a place," she said, "you owe it something, even if you arrived by accident, even if you never intended to stay." Cole looked at her for a long moment. "That's a more considered position," he said, "than most people I've met hold about anything." "You have met very few of my kind," she said. "I've met none of your kind," he said, "until today." She smiled a full, human-readable smile, and for a moment, in the blue-white light of that impossible room beneath the Nevada desert, the scales along her jaw caught the glow and shifted through green and black, and something that was neither. And Cole Mercer, who had ridden 11 days through hell to bring in a man worth $300, stood very still and understood that he was in the presence of something that his 11 years had absolutely no framework for, which was, he would later reflect, about the most alive he had felt in a very long time. They brought Silas Dune up through the shaft between them, Cole first, Dune in the middle with his bound wrists and his absence still intact, Soren at the rear. The Nevada afternoon had tipped toward evening while Cole was below, and the light across the Devil's Flats was long and amber, turning the alkali earth to something almost beautiful, laying gold across the cracked flats and the distant red rocks, and the sage scrubs bent sideways in the prevailing wind. Cinder was still tied where Cole had left him. The gelding turned at the sound of footsteps, and his ears, which had been flat for an hour, came forward not to their full alert, but forward. Tentatively, reassessing. Soren came up last through the hatch and stood for a moment on the surface of the desert, with her eyes closed and her face turned up toward that amber light. Cole watched her. She stood like that for a long time, long enough that the light shifted slightly, deepened, moved a fraction further toward the red end of the evening spectrum, and her expression was not one he could name precisely. It was something between grief and gratitude, which are sometimes, he had found, the same feeling, wearing different clothes. "You've been down there a long time," he said quietly. "A very long time," she said, without opening her eyes. "Do you miss it, wherever you came from?" She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I miss what I remember of it. After 43 years, what I remember and what was real have become difficult to separate." She opened her eyes and looked at the horizon, where the last light was settling over the edge of the earth. "I find that I have also become attached to this." A gesture that took in the flats, the sky, the impossible emptiness of the Nevada desert at evening, which I did not anticipate. Cole tied Dune across Cinder's saddle and stood beside the horse, looking at her. "When you leave," he said, "will you come back?" She turned her dark eyes toward him. The copper-green scales at her temples caught the amber evening light and held it, and for a moment her face was both entirely alien and entirely present, entirely itself. "That is not a question I can answer today," she said. "Fair enough," Cole said. He swung up onto Cinder, the horse still faintly uneasy but willing now, and settled the reins. Below, through the open hatch, the blue-white light of the chamber glowed up through the earth like a star that had gotten turned around. "Cole Mercer," Soren said. He looked down at her. "The man you are returning to Carson City, the judge who posted his warrant." She paused. "He is a fair man?" "Fair enough," Cole said, "for a judge." She considered this with the particular seriousness she gave to everything. "Good," she said. Cole touched his hat brim. It was the only thing he could think of that felt right. And it felt right because it was genuine, an acknowledgement that something extraordinary had occurred, offered in the only register he had available to him. Then he turned Cinder toward the north and rode out across the Devil's Flats in the last amber light of the Nevada evening, with Silas Dune across his saddle and $300 waiting in Carson City, and behind him, in the desert, a hatch settling silently back into the earth, above a chamber full of blue-white light and 4 impossible women, and 43 years of a secret the desert had held without effort, without complaint, the way the desert holds everything. Completely, indifferently, for as long as required. He was 2 miles out when he heard it faint, rising from the ground itself, or perhaps from the air above it, or perhaps from somewhere entirely outside the categories his senses worked with. A sound, the double-toned harmonic of a language he didn't speak, and beneath it, distinct and warm, and carrying easily across that silent open ground, the unmistakable quality of laughter. Cole Mercer rode on. He was smiling. 3 days later, he collected his $300 from Judge Hollis in Carson City. He did not tell the judge where he had found Silas Dune, or how the man had been neutralized, or about the hatch in the Devil's Flats, or the chamber below it, or the 4 women with their luminous scales and impossible eyes who had been living in silence beneath the Nevada desert for 43 years, waiting to be certain they were leaving nothing harmful behind. He kept that to himself. It seemed, on balance, like the right thing to do. A week after that, he rode back out to the Devil's Flats. He told himself he was checking a different trail. He was not, and he knew it. The hatch was still there. The depression near the seam was warm under his fingers in the same way it had been. He pressed it. Nothing rose. The rectangle stayed flush with the earth. The seam was there, but the mechanism, whatever it had been, was no longer responding. Cole crouched there for a while with his hand flat on the iridescent surface, which was still cool in that impossible way under the Nevada sun, and he looked out across the Devil's Flats, empty and white, and going on forever in every direction. Above him, unobstructed, the sky was enormous. Somewhere in it, somewhere in the incomprehensible distance between one world and the next 4 women who had spent 43 years listening to a planet through 40 feet of Nevada earth, were finally, after all that time, going home. He hoped they made it. "Much obliged," Cole Mercer said quietly. "To no one, to the empty desert, to the door in the ground that was no longer a door." Then he stood, put his hat back on, swung up onto Cinder, and rode north. That's where we leave Cole Mercer, a bounty hunter who rode into the Devil's Flats looking for a wanted man, and found something the West had never put a price on. If this story reached you the way the desert reaches a man who's been riding too long suddenly, completely all at once, then make sure you subscribe and hit that bell. There are more stories waiting. The West is bigger than any map has ever managed to show.